Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Big rumours emerging today that ramp up the possibility of Adrian Newey getting poached away from Red Bull by Ferrari. Rumour has it that he's been spotted at Bologna airport very recently for a meeting, it seems, with John Alcala and Fred Maranello with the Ferrari team. Will this go anywhere? Will Ferrari be able to get another blockbuster move done in this market over these last couple of months? Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. First of all, just to look back really at the last Chinese Grand Prix we had back in 2019. This was the gap to pole, and it was a different time, wasn't it? The Williams that year was a tractor, 3.7 seconds. I believe in Q1 they were like 2.5 seconds away from the pace of the Mercedes or the leading car in Q1, and over the entire qualifying session, the Williams was terrible. But look, there are positives and negatives to the current state of Formula 1. One positive is the field is spread tighter, certainly in qualifying sessions, compared to what it was back in 2019. Just to quickly note as well, these are the circuits on the calendar. The ones in green are the tracks where Max Verstappen has won. The ones in red he hasn't. Singapore famously, but also that's true for China as well. Of course, we haven't been there in a few years. He didn't win when he raced, pre-2019, so he'll try and change that. Of course, Verstappen does have by far the most sprint race victories of any driver on the grid, and it is a sprint race this weekend in China. Couple of quick things on upgrades going into the Grand Prix. Alpine, well, they are blaming previous management for the fact that their car is terrible, but they are bringing an upgrade this weekend. They, I think, brought an upgrade last race or 2 races ago. I'm not sure it was especially noticeable. They're trying to cut down a bit of weight, and they have apparently fast-tracked a floor upgrade. So I'm sure that's going to work, and is really going to turn their season around. I believe that Ocon is actually going to get it first. So that's pretty interesting, just to show how things are going internally there at Alpine. Ocon has, beaten Gasly for the season so far, but it's not like there's many points to show for it, right? But yeah, Ocon will receive the upgrade first, it seems. Then Gasly will follow in Miami and beyond. They also said, Alpine, if Ocon and Gasly are signed away, they are ready to react. Looking at their academy, I would say the most likely candidate is probably Jack Doohan, who's done a respectable job for them in Formula 2 with that Alpine project. There is also, Mick Schumacher, like he is kind of with Alpine now for the WEC stuff, so maybe that's a possibility. But I guess that's relatively unlikely. I would say that Doohan is probably the man that they would promote if they were to lose either Ocon or Gasly, but it's kind of tough to say where either of those guys would go, because it doesn't seem that there's a clear, massive step up in a seat elsewhere on the grid. There may be better teams than Alpine presently are available, but not necessarily good enough to want to lock yourself into a contract of, when maybe an offer from a better team could come along at some point. It's just tough the way that it's gone for those guys. Speaking on Racing Bulls real quick, they have a new chassis this weekend, of course, especially for Daniel Ricciardo, which, well, he has basically said, I don't think I'm washed, I think it might be the chassis. So this weekend we'll see whether it was the chassis or whether he is actually washed. They will have an upgrade for Miami, though, which I believe is getting fast-tracked somewhat as well. So that is the plan for VCARB, as some are still calling them. And even Daniel Ricciardo says he'd be happy to spend another season there. I'm enjoying the driving now. It is not so much results driven, which maybe tells you everything you need to know about Ricciardo's current feeling on his form, and saying, well, it's not even really about getting the Red Bull seat. It's not about competing for race wins or championships. Again, it's just about having a good time and, being a marketing asset for Visa Cash App Racing Bulls, which is basically what he is at the moment. So, the trajectory of a season, I'm not surprised with the statement, but I think it probably indicates where he feels like he is. Couple of driver things as well. Hülkenberg to Sauber is apparently like a done deal with all intents and purposes. Apparently he's going to be joining forces with Sauber, Audi owned, of course. That is now extremely likely, opening the door, of course, to Oliver Behrman to probably take his seat at Haas. Whether Magnussen stays, that is a question, but if you guys have seen recently, Magnussen's getting the upgrades in China, whereas Hülkenberg isn't, we believe. So maybe that kind of implies the way that they are feeling how their drivers are going to develop over the coming months, let's say, as they prep their lineup for next season. On Mercedes, though, they will hope that Antonelli does a good job. So testing he will be doing in, I think, initially the W12, then the W13. They're going to test Antonelli in. He's not 18 yet, so he can't get his super license yet, but he will be able to, and he will be a possible driver for next season's Mercedes car. They might sign Sainz, that's a possibility. There's other options. But the general feeling tends to be that the number one option will be Antonelli. Sainz, if Mercedes and Sainz can come to an arrangement they think works on a shorter term basis, they might well do it because I think it makes sense of both parties, but they do think that Antonelli, he will be a Mercedes driver, I think, at some point. The question is, will it be next year or further in the future? And they are going to give Antonelli as much testing as he can possibly get. So adverse weather conditions today in Austria, where he was going to do some testing, so they're going to try again apparently tomorrow. But despite Mercedes' highly underwhelming start to the season, they actually became the world's first Formula One team to record a revenue, a turnover of over £500 million, which is, I think it calls into question to some degree. Here's Toto Wolff, of course, shareholder of the team, exactly what matters today in Formula One, because ideally the teams are trying to win and be the best they can be. And sure, if that helps increase shareholder value, then sure, you're going to do it. But if you look at the revenue that Mercedes have been able to generate, and I don't even necessarily think this is so much cost cap and budget cap related, that might have something to do with profit margins. I think their profit margin actually went down somewhat this year compared to last year, but in terms of turnover and revenue, they are massively in the black, and I think they made a profit of something like £80 million. So I just wonder how that looks for the rest of the grid, because if all the teams are balling out of control, it's no surprise why they want to limit it to effectively a franchise ecosystem where only 10 teams are allowed to exist. And if Haas and Williams are making profits, which I don't think they necessarily are, James Vowles said last year that Williams certainly isn't, but if they were to, in this current ecosystem we have, with the way that Formula One has grown and the media rights and these other factors that are generating some of these very lucrative revenues for the teams, I guess makes you wonder the fact that, sure, is this sustainable for Mercedes? They're losing Hamilton, they're going to lose partners and sponsors as a result of that. There's no denying it. They're going to follow him elsewhere to Ferrari, and it might be a struggle for Mercedes to maintain this kind of progress. But also, if they're falling back on the grid and they're still maintaining this type of trajectory, and Toto Wolff's job at the end of the day is to maximize shareholder value, you've got to wonder whether, you know, his head and his heart and his pocket is really in the right place when it comes to getting Mercedes back to the top. We mentioned Carlos Sainz a couple of seconds ago. He was also echoing Max Verstappen's opinion that doing a sprint race this weekend in China is not a good idea. But, you know, these are some of the decisions that Formula One like to make. There were further discussions today that talks are ongoing with Mercedes about a potential deal. Sainz would like a potentially longer term arrangement. Mercedes would like a shorter term deal. But even for Sainz, you might think, well, you know what, if I go there and I beat Russell, then theoretically they might kick Russell out when they bring Antonelli in rather than kicking Sainz out. But also Carlos might be holding off a little bit for the possibility of the Red Bull seat, which is not necessarily entirely out of the realms of possibility. And this is where we come back again to what AMUS have had to say very recently today, Michael Schmidt as well, who is typically very well informed on the matters internally at Red Bull. The feeling is that from whatever we see publicly at the moment, which is not that much from Red Bull, that does not mean things aren't still in turmoil behind the scenes. And as I say, this is really as reliable of sources as you're going to find on these type of discussions. Now, they don't come up with any conclusions in the article, but what they do say is very interesting indeed, discussing the Red Bull situation, but also this point at the top here on Newey being spotted in Italy, in Bologna, in presumably Maranello and Modena and the Circuit de Fiorano, where the Ferrari Formula One team is based. So this is how the article goes on. I'll just kind of go from the start here as Junaid. As always, he just chucks it on Twitter. You gotta love this guy. I'll leave everything linked down below for you guys to check out if you want to read the full article as well in the description box below. But they go on to discuss the Red Bull situation, the Horner, the Marco, the Verstappen, the Newey talking all this type of stuff. And yeah, so this is what it goes on to say. The tug of war over the reorganization of the company and racing operations continues unabated. Horner sees himself as the new general with the support of the time majority owners and wants to marginalize the Austrian part as much as is possible. And I do think this will continue to be the case. All attempts by the opposing party, and we have seen multiple attempts and multiple angles to make this happen, of course, you know, the lawsuits and other factors played into their hands, it seems, rather nicely. And of course the allegations, right, which is part of that whole thing. Quite a few in the team are worried that the revolts could cause the empire to falter. Verstappen and Newey are among them, as in concerns that things are not going as planned. The three-time world champion has already made it clear that to stay in the team, that depends on what happens with Helmut Marko. Marko is the key to Verstappen's future. If Marko leaves or has to leave, Verstappen can leave, based on this clause in the contract that Marko seemingly inserted. Mercedes is waiting for that, but unfortunately for Mercedes, their car ain't any good. So Max ain't going to want to leave, probably, right, to that team. Let's be honest here. So that's what they say, that Red Bull, the insurance for Red Bull and the insurance for Horner is that, you know, Verstappen isn't really going to just walk away. Because where does he walk away to? A Mercedes that's going backwards? Probably not. Now, Aston Martin in 2026 might be quite attractive, we'll discuss them in a second, but for now, doesn't make much sense. So the alternatives are thinner, Verstappen would be a loss to Red Bull that cannot be compensated, and also that's actually what they say there, the alternatives to Verstappen are thinner with some of the the guys that have been signed, Hamilton, Alonso, Norris, and Sainz is being pressured by Audi who want him to make a decision on where he's going to go. But then they discuss Adrian Newey and how valuable he is to the team and also where he might potentially be going to. Even if the star designer only works part-time, okay, Red Bull say he only works part-time so they could write off some of his salary at the cost cap, so you might debate on how much he actually works on the Formula 1 project, as we have done previously. But yeah, as they say, yes, there is a top-class design office, but the value of the 65-year-old should not be underestimated. Newey is one of the few engineers in the scene who has a complete understanding of a racing car concept and more experience than anyone else. The Grand Effect era has shown that these two characteristics are the key to success. The loss of Newey would hit Red Bull twice. The team itself would lose the highest technical authority. What's worse is the competition would gain expertise that is urgently needed. Newey lives in his own technical world, but his antennae have always had a keen sense of when something was going wrong in the team. There is nothing he hates more than internal politics. Since Red Bull's financial blessing went wrong, the competition has tasted blood. So that was actually a pretty interesting point on, not enjoying internal politics. Often, guys like Newey, they don't want to mess around with any of the BS, right? They want stability so they can sit there and design the car. Any other chaos is just counterproductive. And I imagine that Newey probably does feel that way, and Michael Schmidt certainly seems to believe that is the case. So if there was ever a chance for Newey to break out of Red Bull, or to break Newey out of Red Bull, now is the chance. Mercedes, it seems, has not even taken part in the hunt, so that leaves the two teams that we have discussed previously, Aston Martin, who have big money and deep pockets, and then of course Ferrari. So Aston Martin would have the location advantage, as it were. There's been reasons why, up until this point, he has not gone to work in Maranello because, learning Italian, moving to Italy, family-related implications, especially because he's now 65. There's reasons why he hasn't done that. Staying in England, near Silverstone with Aston Martin, that would make some sense if they were to get him. But of course, at the end of his career, it would be a crowning achievement to go to Ferrari. And of course, Newey has also made it clear in recent, let's say the last 12 months or so, that his career regrets, if he was to have any, was never working with Alonso, never working with Hamilton. Those are two that he would like to have done. And of course, Ferrari is always somewhere in that conversation. So Hamilton's going to be at Ferrari, Alonso's going to be at Aston Martin. You can obviously see reasons why both would be attractive prospects. And this is then what Schmidt says. Obviously, this time it is serious. Newey was recently spotted at Bologna airport. So, well, I guess quickly, let's just have a look at Google Maps. Not often we go on Google Maps here on the channel, but, I think it's about time. So here we are. We've got Milan, we've got Florence, San Marino, and, well, here is Bologna. You fly into the airport, which is right about here. And then, of course, you head northwest to Modena, and just south of Modena, you will find Maranello, as we find right here. So the home of Ferrari, and we have the Circuit de Fiorano and all this type of stuff. So, like, if you're spotted at Bologna airport, especially if you're Adrian Newey spotted at Bologna airport, I don't think there's any pictures of this going around, unfortunately. I wish there was. It would be very interesting. I wonder if he was trying to keep undercover. Remember when Hamilton went to Silverstone last year to watch his brother race, and he, dressed in full black, but then he had those bright pink boots on. It was like, come on, this guy's obviously Lewis Hamilton. So I don't think he was particularly inconspicuous. But, yeah, seemingly Newey was with those guys over there in Maranello. At least he was in Bologna, so presumably he was doing something, especially because we believe that here's John Elkann coming out of the Red Bull hospitality back in Saudi Arabia, I believe this was, when there were big discussions on whether he had had conversations with Newey. And it's like a known thing. Like, Ferrari aren't denying this, that they're speaking to Newey, they're trying to acquire his services. This is like a known thing, and apparently he was very recently in Italy having such a conversation. And presumably this has happened with Hamilton as well. And Hamilton was saying, no, going to stay at Mercedes, makes the most sense of me, it's family. And all of a sudden, something changes, and bang, the deal is done in a relatively quick time frame. Sometimes these things can happen, and as we mentioned when we have discussed this Newey Ferrari story in the past, the very fact that Hamilton went to Ferrari means that things like this are totally not impossible. So yeah, this is what the article then goes on to discuss, that a title with Ferrari and Newey would be the greatest, ideally with Hamilton. Whoever gets it though will have to wait, because he has a contract until the end of 2025. That is the way the article concludes. So him leaving now and joining another team for next year that's not going to happen. And he has to deliver the hypercar, the RB17 project as well, for Red Bull. So if he is going to join Ferrari, it will not happen next year, but it will happen for the year after in 2026. So look, I'm sure that they would very much value his services. Ideally, Newey would, let's say if you're Ferrari, would be able to join now, right? Because then he would be able to work through the entire project and develop that 2026 set of regulations. But even if he joins on the day that the season begins, he's still going to be obviously a valuable asset as time progresses. So there's several reasons why this makes sense. But of course, maintaining the status quo is always easier, right? And for Newey's side, he's going to be there for at least another year, it seems, based on the contract that he has. But that does not mean that after that, that's necessarily going to be the same. And Ferrari are acquiring elsewhere as well. Like it's not like Newey or bust, I believe there are rumors recently that Ferrari are acquiring like 6 top engineers from Mercedes, from other teams. So they are continuing to push. And De Kessler here says that, in Maranello, the engineers and the designers are doing very well. They don't need Newey. But look, if you want to take this Ferrari revival seriously, which they clearly are with the signing of Hamilton and the other moves that Vasseur and Elkann are making, Newey would absolutely cap that off. But even as it stands, they're optimistic they can close the gap to Red Bull right now with upgrades they're going to bring. I just wanted to mention one other thing on Aston Martin and why they are apparently quite a deadly team for 2026 and why their offer to Newey might be more attractive than the offer that Ferrari are able to give. First of all, staying in the UK, that's one point, but also on the 2026 power units, because they will run the 2026 engines on 100% synthetic fuels. The hybrid element, of course, will be massively important. The Honda has a great hybrid engine at the moment, or has a great electrical component with the Red Bull. Newey, of course, has experience with that. So that Honda Aston Martin effectively factory partnership in 2026 makes a lot of sense. But also, MUS also reported today that Aramco, as in, Saudi Aramco, Aston Martin primary sponsor, therefore Aston Martin and Honda, will have a head start because the Arab oil company has already been supporting the FIA with fuel samples when drawing up the new regulations. Aramco also supplies the e-fuels that are already used in Formula 2 and Formula 3. And Aramco is investing huge sums in this project of synthetic fuels. So the fact that Aston Martin have the Honda partnership and the Aramco partnership is leading many to believe that if there's any team that's going to have a head start in 2026, Aston Martin may be one of the most likely to do exactly that. And if that was to be the case, then Newey coming along might make a fair bit of sense. I think this whole thing is rather fascinating. And as I mentioned, we've already known that Newey has had on his bucket list, as it were, working with Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. You can probably only do one of the two, but it's kind of now or never, right? If you're Newey, theoretically 65, like his career, presumably he's not going to go on designing F1 cars until he's 90, but honestly, who knows, right? This guy might do an Alonso of the designer world. But, theoretically, you have one chance now if you're Newey to, cap off your career with a big move like this in the same way that Alonso has tried with Aston Martin and Hamilton is certainly going for with Ferrari. And I feel like given all the circumstances behind the scenes, it is pretty likely that one of these teams gives Newey an offer that he feels that he has a very difficult time refusing, right? So I think there's a good 50% chance that Newey leaves Red Bull in 2026 or goes to another team in 2026, whether it's Aston, whether it's Ferrari, probably one of the two, but of course he could stay at Red Bull as well. That is most certainly a possibility. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.